Okay, we're recording. Hi,
Awesome.
Nick. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, no problem at all.
So, I'm Kathy Marcello. I'm the Assistant Director of Programs at Modern Military Association of America. And we've got Nick here today, and we're really excited to talk to you, Nick. Do you want to just give us a quick introduction and talk about kind of where you are now with your military career?
Sure. My name's First Lieutenant Harrison, and I just graduated from JAG school, actually right yesterday. And so this is sort of a culmination of a long process. I originally applied for a JAG commission back in 2014, and I was denied that commission because of my HIV status. And over the years, I've sort of fought that, and in April of 2022, we finally got a federal court ruling that changed the military's policy and allowed me to commission and to go out to JAG school. So, having just emerged from that process, here I am, I guess.
And how was it? How was your time at Fort Moore and then in Charlotte? Did you
It
Yeah, I was going to
it
say, did
it
you
really
come
was.
into that with kind of a thing on your shoulders of like, I'm the guy who just won the lawsuit? Did you feel like that identified you there, or did you feel welcomed? What was your experience like?
I definitely felt welcomed. I came in there sort of with a low profile. Like I just sort of walked in there, and I don't necessarily assume anybody knows the story whenever I walked in. And so Vice News had talked to me about doing a interview while I was going through DCC down at Fort Moore, and they ended up doing that. I passed along that request to the cadre down there, and they sent it up through the chain, and they allowed them to do some videotaping and stuff. But throughout that process, I was just sort of carrying on as a normal student, and then came down to the time where they were getting ready to come down and interview, and went in to talk to the commander down there, and brought in one of the students, and I'm like, yeah, this is my story. I originally applied for a commission back in 2014, and sort of went through this entire court process challenging the military's policy. And there's this news crew that's coming to sort of do a documentary, and he turned to me and looked at me and said, "Well, Nick, most of the people already in the formation already know about your case and are familiar with it." So that was that was a big surprise to me because I really had told that they all sort of knew about it and were aware of it. And whenever I got told the whole formation that news crew was going to sort of document the process, they were extremely supportive. They were happy about it. And I think throughout the entire process of going through DCC and then the Judge Advocate School, um, they saw it as very sort of inspirational. It's kind of what they would aspire to. That I had wanted to do this back in 2014, and that I stuck with it and sort of went all the way through the process. They thought that that was very motivational, going through that process.
It is really motivational. That's nice to hear. So that community was welcoming, and it had really just been big army in a paperwork kind of system that didn't let you advance before. But I'm wondering if you kind of at an individual level have experienced anti-HIV positive bias while you were serving.
Right. It's it's very sort of difficult for me to really under. I don't think that my experience is necessarily the same as everybody else's experience in the military, in particular because I've been in the spotlight and been in this sort of bubble in DC, where everybody knows that I was sort of challenging the policy, and everybody knows that the media was talking to me. Nobody would really communicate any of the prejudice or the stigma. So everybody around me has always been supportive. I don't think anybody would ever come to me and sort of say, we have a problem with it. Um, I feel like having gone through JAG school, that the JAG community, the attorneys in the military, are much more receptive to the idea, and they're of course much more knowledgeable about it, sort of much more, I guess, of enlightened perspective. But from the personnel side of it, the Army G1, they haven't always been very receptive. They were the ones that we were fighting in this policy, and um, we still have problems with the way that they are implementing the court's decisions. They kind of drug their feet whenever it came to giving me a commission and so forth. So I think there are pockets within the military that are very receptive and open-minded. There are parts of the military that are not receptive and open-minded. Um, I've heard stories from people in parts of the country that they sort of reach out to me and tell me about their problems or the situations that they've had. I know that their experiences are very different, and that they can have a lot of stigma and a lot of discrimination, a lot of fear based on where they're stationed at, what their units are like, and what their commanders are like.
As a fellow Washington D.C. Bubble liver, yeah, I live in the bubble of Washington D.C. as well. So I get it. Like sometimes um you're separated from kind of what people are facing in more remote areas. Can you kind of expand on some of the stories that like you've heard working as an ally for other HIV positive service members in terms of like the hardships or the discrimination they have faced?
Sure. I guess the big thing that I have noticed is that most people who are sort of outside this the Washington D.C. bubble are very fearful about what's this going to mean. How is the unit going to react? How are the commanders going to react? Are they going to be helpful or receptive? Um, I know some people who have been diagnosed with HIV have been sort of pushed out of the military by their chain of command. One of the most harrowing stories that still sticks out in my mind is I talked to a service member who was, I believe, someplace in the South, and they told me about a healthcare provider, a military healthcare provider, that sexually assaulted them in a clinical setting. And they tried to reach out to TRICARE, try to get a different doctor assigned, and they were like, "No, sorry, you just have to deal with who you're assigned." And that's really sort of the vulnerability that I feel like a lot of service members who are out there who are HIV positive deal with all the time. Is this sort of fear that if I make an issue of my status or who I am or the treatment that I'm getting, that they feel like they're going to get retaliated against, or that there's going to be some harmful effects to their career. And I think that that's something that we're working on as a organization and as a community to make sure that that doesn't happen. That all service members should feel supported. I I still consider it huge a huge issue in the military that people are reaching out to me just online because they don't feel like they've got any support. They don't feel like there's anybody around them that they can turn to and they can count on. And as long as that's the case in the military, I think that that's a problem. That's something that we need to address.
Well said. Yeah, concur. I think I can identify with that culture of fear and retaliation in that we have so many families with trans youth who are living under the radar
Right.
um
Right.
and not pushing back. Yeah. Sometimes that being a good soldier aspect can really like play into how much people feel they can push back. That's part of why you and I are working together on a document that's gonna kind of be a guide for HIV
Right.
positive service that I'm really excited about. We're going to kind of lay out exactly what policies apply, um, how the waiver process works and things like that so that people don't have to depend on the kindness of the command they're dealing with. They'll know their rights. So I'm
Right.
excited about that, but I feel like I jumped ahead because can you explain to people what barriers service members still face when we're talking about this waiver situation?
Right. So initially, whenever we filed the case, it was a total ban on commissioning or deploying overseas, and we've got a court ruling now that says that if you're already in the military and you want to commission, you can do that, and that you should be able to deploy overseas too, if you're undetectable. Those are sort of the 2 points. There are cases that are still going on, and areas that we're trying to work on is if you are just joining the military and you find out that you're HIV positive, or you know you're HIV positive before, there really shouldn't be a reason that that's a barrier to you, that's stopping you. There are problems still with, I guess, people's personnel records. You open up somebody who's HIV positive, and there's this big flag on your IPSA that says you're non-deployable. That's inaccurate, and that shouldn't be there anymore. Um, there's also a problem with the waiver and the exception to policy process. Um, if HIV is no longer if you're undetectable and you have HIV, that's no longer a disqualifying medical condition. And if that's the case, why do you need a medical waiver? That whole process is sort of um, problematic. Same case with an exception to policy if you're deploying overseas and you're undetectable. And it's supposed to be no longer a ban. If that policy has been stricken down, why are they having people do an exception to policy? And so those questions, as far as why people are still acting like the policy is in effect whenever the court has come down and said that no, you shouldn't be doing those are things that we're still fighting and still trying to get addressed. I think the big issue with the waiver process and the exception to policy process is if each of those processes you're kind of asking somebody for special permission, like and they do what they call a whole sort of picture analysis. And so it's like if you were coming up to somebody like just after they desegregated the military, or just after they allowed gays in the military, lesbians in the military, and you single all those people out and you say, this is somebody who's in this discriminatory category, and you're going to hand that to a decision maker and be like, oh yeah, can you think of any other reason why this person shouldn't be allowed to do this? It's creating sort of a pretext or encouraging them to find another pretext for why this service member shouldn't be allowed to do something that they're legally allowed to do. And that's problematic. That's why I think our legal team is still fighting those issues.
So after your lawsuit, the office of the G1 was supposed to start kind of working on military policy as it relates to HIV positive service. What
Right.
happened there?
Well, the Secretary of the Defense basically put out a memo that said, told all the services, HIV should no longer be considered a disqualifying medical condition. People shouldn't be denied the opportunity to be deployed on that basis. And he told all the military services to form these working groups to re-examine the HIV policies and all the services. The Army's G1, they formed a working group. And what we've been told is that working group recommended removing all the restrictions as far as HIV goes. If you were with HIV and you want to join the military, they said that the ban no longer makes any sense, that should be removed and lifted. Um, Apparently, that recommendation was quashed at some level within the Army's G1, and we're still trying to figure out why, who did that, and try to get a meeting in. We have not had any real success in sort of figuring out what's going on there, and that's problematic because the Secretary of Defense is saying have a working group look at this, and whenever he says appoint these people and do this thing, and the Army G1 is saying, oh well, we're going to quash all these things. We don't really care what the Secretary of Defense is saying. That's an issue.
It is. And why am I thinking about a December 2022 deadline? Were they supposed to have answers from the working group by then?
Yes, they were supposed to have answers from all the working groups and I guess publish and act upon them and so forth was sort of the um, anticipated or sort of implied intent behind that. And none of that has happened. It's sort of been held up. And I guess they're currently trying to litigate that and find out what's going on with the process there. Um,
For all
it's
services, did any of the services come up with new policy guidance or no?
I'm not sure what the other services did. Sort of my um, I guess my blinders are on the Army because that's sort of the process that I've gone through.
Hmm.
Um, my my understanding is sort of culturally. The Navy and the Marines have always been a lot better at it. They're the ones that sort of came out initially with the idea that HIV service members could deploy on larger ships, and had a lot of exceptions and flexibility there. It's really the Army, and even the Air Force has been even worse. They haven't had that sort of that understanding. And so I'm not sure specifically what the working groups have done and not done, but I know that there are differences between the services as far as who's doing what. Um, at the Army level, it seems that the Army G1 in particular, there seems to be some sort of prejudice or stigma that is translating into policy, and that shouldn't be the case.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to see where this gets pushed next, and I'm really glad that you're working on it. Hopefully we can help. So,
Yes, thanks.
what advice would you give to a service member who has recently received an HIV diagnosis? Kind of what's the your go-to advice?
Right. Um, well, the first thing that I usually do is I try to connect them with the community here um, at the Modern Military Association of America. We have a sort of a secret Facebook group and a lot of members who um, share resources and communicate with each other and are very supportive to one another. And I think that that community is very helpful for people to try to get tips and insights and ideas of like, okay, where should I go? Who should I talk to? What approach should I take? And that's very useful. Um, the biggest conversation that I have with most people who are freshly diagnosed really revolves around the idea of people who are HIV positive still having worth, still having value. A lot of people, their fears initially are, I've just been diagnosed with this, and it's sort of an OMG. Is anybody ever going to want to date me or be with me again or whatnot? And that's something that I know that a lot of people grapple with. What I tried to tell them and let them know is that um, the dating world changes slightly, but if you find somebody who's of value, somebody that you want to be intimate with, somebody who you want to have a relationship with, they are not going to have that as an issue. Um, it takes a while for people to sort of educate themselves and learn about it and understand it. But the CDC recently came out with like a lot of guidance that says that if you're undetectable, um, you can't transmit it to everyone. There's a lot of safe sex practices out there, like treatment as prevention and like PrEP, that are ways in which people can continue to have sex and not have any risk of exposure whatsoever. And so, as soon as you are diagnosed, I think it's sort of taking a step back, taking a breath, and understanding that you still have value, you still have worth, you're still entitled to love just like everyone else, and that there will be people out there who you can connect with and have those relationships with. Um, and you'll be able to form those sort of understandings with people. Um, and that's sort of an important thing that the people have to realize. Um, from there, talking to us and sort of getting in contact with somebody in the community, we can sort of help you through that process and sort of give you advice and sort of let you know where you need to go, and what you need to do.
Wow. The parallels to my own experience as the mom to a trans child are really hitting home in two ways. I find that we also have a secret Facebook group for parents of trans and non-binary kids, and there is nothing better than that hive knowledge that you can share with the community. For those resources of where to go, who to talk to. This is how you get it done when you get pushback. But also just being part of a community that loves you, that's going to support you, and kind of makes you feel like you do have a home when you might be feeling lost. But also on like a personal level, the conversation about you still have worth, you will find love. so many moms of trans kids have had that same conversation. You are still worthy and valid, and you will have love. And when you find that special person, they're going to love you no matter what. It's just so interesting to think about those parallels there. I was really happy to hear that you are able to help people on the journey when they are first encountering like such a hard life situation. That's really beautiful to hear, Nick. Thank you.
And
Um,
it's a there are a lot of parallels, and I guess the interesting thing that I've heard a lot of people sort of compare it to is it's almost like a second coming out process, for a lot of people.
yeah, for sure. Um, so I guess the other side of it is what advice would you give to someone who wants to join the military and they are suddenly confronted with an HIV positive diagnosis? And that kind of leads into what still needs to be done on the law front.
I mean, I think if they're confronted with an HIV diagnosis and they're, denied the opportunity to go forward, um, that's something that we're challenging right now. I know there's a case that's been argued, and they're basically waiting on a decision back from the federal court as far as that particular policy. Um, Anybody who's impacted that, or I'd say by any other sort of political issue, like they're having to go from food reserves or vice versa, but I tell them to get it in writing, um, to ask, respectfully. I understand that's a policy. I understand that's the decision, but I need you to put it in writing for me so that I have it and I can like take it back, wherever I need to be to do a waiver, do an exception to policy, or whatever the case may end up being. Um, that that's something that, particularly in the military, we're not always accustomed to. Like if we get told no, it's sort of ingrained or sort of impressed upon us that we just are supposed to salute and carry on and like abide by that respectfully. But there's a way in particular whenever you're dealing with one of these policies that you actually have to ask them politely and respectfully to put it in writing and document it so that when the policies start changing and whenever we get these court rulings, we're able to take that and do something about it for you.
That's amazing. So, for me, the things that stand out that I want people to know are that lawsuits are ongoing for being able to enlist in the military. The work is ongoing in terms of making things more equitable for
Right.
service members who are HIV positive. Um, and that the best thing you can do if you are an HIV positive service member is come find Nick's HIV positive service forum on the MMAA website. There's a link to it to join, and that's kind of where you can find that hive knowledge of the community that's going to be able to support you and give you all the answers you need. Is there anything we're leaving out that you want to make sure people know?
The only other thing that I'll say that sort of usually goes in the process is um, like anyone who reaches out, either sends me an email or sort of goes to that link. I'll usually make time to sort of reach out to them within 48 or 72 hours. There have been a lot of times where it doesn't matter if I'm in a meeting or if I'm, you know, whatever I'm doing that day, I'll always sort of step out and have a conversation, have a phone call with them and sort of walk them through the process. And then there's a lot of people who were working on this case on as far as the legal team goes and other pro bono attorneys and stuff that if you're having an issue, um, I'll talk to you and sort of collect a little bit of information. And then a lot of times we'll set up a one-on-one conversation with somebody on our legal team who will sort of get the information from you, find out if there's anything that they can do to help, and just sort of provide a little bit of legal advice if you need that as well. So I think those are important resources for you that are available through the process.
That's amazing, Nick. We're so lucky to have you. The community is so lucky that you're there as an ally for everyone else. So grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I
I think
appreciate
that's
that.
it for today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.